Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, we are from 4th group and in this video we will discuss about planning for responses. Before we start, let me introduce myself. My name is Eka Dian Sulistyantini and there is my partner Nurul Febrianti and Andari Nurfatima. Okay everyone, the first presentation will be explained by me. Problem solving model for planning instruction in literature. The first step is defining the needs of student. Defining the needs of student is analyze what skills students already have and find out what skills are underdeveloped or rarely used in articulating responses. As you can see, the initial questions may seem straightforward, but answering them directly may be complicated by at least two factors. The first factor is schools do not usually begin their analysis for students by asking what they can already do well. The second factor is teachers' decisions are often constrained by the curriculum over which they have little control. Rather than entering the classroom with a predetermined set of objectives and established agenda, teachers need to be sensitive to their students' strengths and their problem. The second step is determining an instructional purpose. It is critical for teachers to understand the purpose of an activity and to communicate it to students. Typically, in order to increase students' confidence in articulating responses, the teacher requires students to give the responses first about what they think. As teachers become more familiar with a given activity, like free-writing for instance, or mapping, and more familiar with a particular group of students, they can more easily decide when a given activity will be appropriate. The third step is unpacking my own responses. In unpacking my own responses, the teacher usually anticipates the type of student responses to a given task. As an experienced person, a teacher must rely on their expertise in unpack their responses when responding to a text that will be responded to by a student. Students may respond to the same text differently from their teacher and differently from one another. The next step is identifying student characteristics. In this case, as teachers, we must know the characteristics of students in responding to certain texts. Knowing students well does not necessarily mean that we know what they know about a text they will respond to. If our planning is to be useful, we must try to understand how our students respond to the text we read together. If students have difficulty responding to the text, the teacher can use certain strategies and vary them according to student abilities. After students are able to respond to a text, the teacher can assess the student ability to use strategies that are suitable for their student. The next step is organizing the classroom. The first basic patterns of grouping students is solo writing. Solo writing is students are asked to write on their own, whether it's about journals, letters, or free writing, by asking students to reflect or describe the text before sharing their responses in pairs or groups. Next is pairs. Pairs is perfect for sharing responses in relatively familiar contexts and reacts positively in providing feedbacks to other students. Next is in small groups. Small groups have a broader perspective or thought. With the addition of students in each group can add opinions, attitudes, or ideas about a text. Usually, students in small groups do not always depend on the teacher. If pairs and small groups have a broad perspective, in large groups, students can actually share a broader perspective than others. As the teachers, you must have a good strategy so that students are able to contribute in asking questions and responding to responses from other students. Students must be able to collaborate with each other to better understand a text. Okay, the next material is about planning responses activities. In devising response activities, teachers will need to address 5 questions. The first question is, what activities will I use and in what order? In selecting activities, teachers first need to determine the scope of an assignment, its length and breadth. Teachers then unpack their own responses to the text. By thinking about how they respond, teachers then select the strategies: engaging, describing, conceiving, connecting, explaining, interpreting, and judging that they believe students may use in responding to a text. So, I think enough about my explanation, and the next presentation will be presented by Nurul Febrianti.
Okay, next, what shall I include in MG direction? Teacher direction for activity are often too nebulous or global. As a result, students do not know what to do in order to complete an activity. In this version, the direction specific both the how of an activity. 3. How do I show them how to do an activity? In additional to specific direction, teacher may also provide students with models or response that demonstrate successful use of the response strategy of activity. Biographical experience to the text may include in the direction. 4. How will student accept the response? After pre-writing, listing, mapping, or any other activity, students should review the initial response and think further about whatever they have announcement information to fulfill the purpose of activity. By review their previous response, students can learn to review on their own thought in the order to extra further meaning. 5. How will I format assessment to ensure response? In formatting written version of an activity, teachers are trying to encourage students to extend the response to previous certain relationship between information listed. In formatting assessment, teacher may consider the following technique. Number 1, subheads. Number 2, number for list. Number 3, grab and cart. D, white space. Next, sample response activity. As we have argued, response strategy can serve as the building block for planning activity. To illustrate the development of activity based on the strategy, we present below a series of sample guide response activity. First, engaging. Students often are difficult expressing engagement because they are seriously aware of how they are expressing the text. To help students understand their emotional response to a text, teacher may enjoy one or more the following activities. Okay, the next material will be explained by Andari.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay, I will continue with the explanation of material about simple response activities. There are 7 response strategies, namely the first, engaging, the second, describing, the third, conceiving, and next, explaining, and then interpreting, and connecting, and the last, judging. Okay. And the second is describing. Readers describe a text when they restate or reproduce the information that is provided verbatim by the author. The strategy seems simple enough, but the fact is that any restatement involves a process of abstraction. Some parts of the text are left out while others are left in. In deciding what to include in a description, readers have already made decisions about what is important in the text. Different readers may make different decisions about the importance of various events, and such difference can be a crucial point of departure for discussions. The next material is conceiving. When readers conceive of the characters or setting in a text, they are moving beyond a description of information to a statement about its meaning. In Irene Good Night, for instance, we can describe the Felix tutors, but that simple fact helps us conceive of Felix nervous in a particular situation, or when Felix introduced himself to Irene at the beginning of story, one can conceive of his act as indicating that he is friendly, that he believes that Irene may grow to like him, that he wants to establish a relationship with her, or all of this. Readers are constantly shuttling back and forth between events and meanings as they experience a text. In fact, the events that are remembered, that are treated as important, are most often those which have been viewed as meaningful. The next is explaining. In explaining a character's action, students are drawing on their conception of characters, traits, beliefs, or goals to infer a reason for that character's action. If we believe, for instance, that Felix failed to show up at Irene's house because he is insecure, then we must begin to explain the reasons for his insecurity. Perhaps his relationship with an alcoholic father has hampered his ability to feel positive about himself, or perhaps his perception of the social context has led him to believe that people like himself never really succeed. In explaining a character, or even in a text, we are moving beyond our inferences about goals or traits to make statements about the larger world of the story, its social, political, and psychological dimensions. The next is interpreting. Interpreting a text involves defining the symbolic meaning, theme, or point of specific event in the text. In making interpretation, we are usually discussing what the text says. For instance, in interpreting Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, we might argue that the text says that the pursuit of money is a morally bankrupt occupation. Or in interpreting Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, we might suggest that sin is a much more complicated issue than the Puritan community believed it to be. Interpretation involves generalization, statements not made in the text but implied by the text. To begin to make defensible interpretation, students must have practice in working from their meanings back to the words on the page, and then back again to a revisit hypothesis. The next is connecting. Students may often connect their own autobiographical or prior reading experiences with the text. For example, in reading Updike's A and P, students may be reminded of a time when they made an embracing gesture in order to make an impression. Or in reading Irene Good Night, they may be reminded of their own awkward moments in conversing with members of the opposite sex. By recollection, students define ideas or attitudes that can help them further reflect on the current text. The last material that is judging. When we judge a text, we are pulling back from it to make evaluative statements about its characters or literary quality. We may want to argue that the behavior of the characters was appropriate or inappropriate, rational or irrational, normal or abnormal. By the same token, we might want to suggest that the story was interesting or not, realistic or not, well written or not. These judgments rarely come at the very end of our reading. They are very much a part of the process of making sense of the text. Thus, eliciting judgment should be very much a part of our teaching. Okay, maybe that's all material from us. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.